Hi there, folks. Thank you very much for taking the time out of your day to join us to talk a little bit about custom relationship mapping. It's a newer feature in CharityCAN, and we do very much appreciate you folks making the time. I think it's safe to start now. So before we begin, I think it might make sense to talk a little bit about how relationship mapping currently works in CharityCAN. Basically, to map relationships, as I'm sure most of you know, what we do is we take our charity directorship data set and our corporate board data set, and we kind of collide those two data sets together to show you how people are connected based on the time they spend on charity boards and on the time they spend on corporate boards. So here's a great example. Let's take a look at Jim Balsillie, who spent his fair bit of time on both boards, just so we can see what a standard relationship map looks like in CharityCAN. So I'm going to go ahead and generate that prospect profile so we can take a look at that. Now, when we scroll down to the relationship map, we can see that this map is made up of people Jim is connected to based on the time he spent on charity boards and on the time he spent on corporate boards. Top connections are listed here on the left, and you can see that all these people spend their time on both charity and corporate boards. Anything in this map you can click on. If you see a person that you're interested in, you can click out and generate that person's prospect profile. If you see a company or a charity that you're interested in, you can click on the company, say desire to learn there, or you can click on the charity, like say Rare Charitable Reserve here. So that's just a kind of a recap of how the default relationship mapping function in CharityCAN works. Now, there's a couple interesting things you can do with this default function from a prospect research perspective. First off, I mean, it's fantastic for finding connections to both current donors, current donors that you might not have already realized your organization has. It's also fantastic for finding connections to brand new donors. So I'm just going to illustrate that with an example from the University of Calgary. So let's go ahead and generate their charity report and take a look at someone on their board of governors, and we'll see how we can use it to prospect a little bit, use that relationship map to prospect. So let's go over to the people on their board of governors. Jill Wyatt, the chair. Sure, as good a person as any. So we generate Jill Wyatt's prospect profile. And so let's pretend that I'm a prospect researcher at the University of Calgary. This person is on my board of governors. Perhaps I can use Jill Wyatt's connections to either strengthen my relationship with a current donor or find myself a brand new donor. So we see Jill Wyatt is our person in the middle, the prospect we're looking at. Now we can hover over this dot, just hover over this network to see if we can find, say, an interesting connection. There we go. So we have Gary Paulson, and we can look at Gary Paulson. Perhaps Gary Paulson is a legitimate prospect himself. We can also see that Gary Paulson is on the board of Fountain Tire Limited. So someone on the board of governors at the University of Calgary has a connection to someone on the board of Fountain Tire Limited. That could be an existing connection, and this is a different way for you to connect with that existing donor, or it could be a brand new connection, and you could have found yourself a brand new prospect by using that relationship map. So that's just really a recap of how relationship mapping currently works in CharityCAN and the default relationship mapping function in CharityCAN. It lets you see people's first, second, and third degree connections based on the time they spend on both charity and corporate boards. And it's great for finding new donors or finding new connections to existing donors that you might want to use to strengthen that relationship a little bit. Now, the real purpose of this webinar today is to introduce everybody into what we're calling custom relationship maps. And basically what we've done is we've taken our relationship mapping function and we're letting you define how those maps work and also defining how connections work and really using it to build out your own relationship maps. So let's just start with the 1, 2, 3 steps of how to build out a custom relationship map. The first thing we need is to save a prospect profile. Custom relationship mapping is wholly dependent on using a saved profile that you saved under My Prospect Profiles. So what I want to do is I want to look up Darren Entwistle from TELUS, and I want to save Darren's profile. Maybe this would just be best if I went straight from TELUS. Just bear with me 1 second. We'll do an organization search for TELUS, and that's how I'll find Darren to save his profile. Let's just go ahead and generate TELUS's corporate report. We'll look at the people we have at TELUS. And I'll find Darren momentarily here. There we go, Darren Entwistle, TELUS. So let's open Darren's prospect profile. And the first thing we want to do to start building custom relationship maps for Darren Entwistle is we need to save that profile. Once we've saved a prospect profile, all we have to do is click on My Prospect Profiles every time we log back into CharityCAN to view all the profiles that we're currently managing. So when I'm going to go to My Prospect Profiles, these are ones that I've been kind of working with or playing with or showing customers or showing prospective customers. But we can see that because I just saved Darren Entwistle, I have a saved version of Darren's prospect profile. Now that I have my own version of his profile, I can start deleting, adding, and amending it as necessary. Now, it is important to keep in mind, this is all on my version of Darren's profile. So the things you people do with your saved profiles don't go out to the community at larger. This is your own silo, I guess, for lack of a better term, under My Prospect Profile. So everything you do in here, all the charity directorships you add or delete, all the notes you make, all the custom relationship maps you make are all going to be exclusive to you and your organization and your version of these profiles. So now that we have a saved profile, we can go ahead and start building out a custom relationship map. So let's go all the way down to the relationship mapping section of this profile. And we can see this is just the default relationship map in CharityCAN, the people map and the organization map. But you can see there's a new button here that only exists under My Prospect Profiles called Custom Graph. Now what we can do here is we can take a custom graph, click on it, and let's create a custom relationship graph. Now, we just have our prospect in the middle here. So we need to start adding some data to this. Now, you might be thinking, okay, well, why would I want to do this? Well, perhaps you have information about your prospect, in this case, Darren Entwistle, that the CharityCAN doesn't have. You have his, his spouse's name, and you want to add that as a family connection. You could easily do that. The names of his children, and you want to add them as family connections. A coworker that's not necessarily someone that we have in our TELUS network or any of other Darren's prior corporate connections that you know is a very strong connection that Darren has, and you want to include that. Custom relationship mapping basically allows you to use our relationship mapping technology and your fundraising intelligence to really start utilizing connections that CharityCAN isn't aware of, but combining them with the connections we're aware of and using those with the connections that you're aware of as a fundraiser. So let's just do a couple examples and start building out this map to see what it looks like. So the first thing we might want to do here, let's click edit. Now what we can do here is we can connect people to this network. So let's say connect a person. CharityCAN is going to give you a list of people we think you might want to connect. Those are all great. They're suggested connections. Let's connect Darren, say a Jim Balsillie, like we were just looking at before. It's the first name that popped in my head. So in this fictional world I'm creating up, we're connecting Darren Entwistle to James Balsillie. We know that they have strong ties that CharityCAN hasn't realized because they've never been on a corporate board together and they've never been on a charity board together. But let's say we know they have a professional relationship that is been going on for about 10 years. We press add. Now we've added Jim Balsillie into Darren Entwistle's professional network in this custom graph. And as you can see here, I'm sure you looked at the options as I was doing that. When we go to connect a person, we type the person's name. Let's just say John Lacey here. We can designate this connection as a professional connection, a personal connection, or a family connection. Really allowing you to kind of drill down and represent the nature of that connection as best as possible. And you can see when you hover over the gray line in the middle of this graph, sorry, I have to leave edit mode to do it. We hover over the gray line in the middle of the graph, we can see that the connection we've made up for Darren Entwistle to James Balsillie is a professional connection that has been going on for 10 years. And we hover over that gray line to realize that. Let's do a couple more things to this graph. Let's edit this graph a little more. Now what we want to do here is let's connect an organization to Darren Entwistle. Now, this, I think, in my mind, is one of the most powerful things about this custom relationship mapping. Because when we start connecting people and organizations, we can then use all of the data that we're including in our relationship path searches in the future. So let's say your charity has a fundraising subcommittee that's different from your board of directors. CharityCAN's not going to have that information necessarily, but by connecting those people to your organization using a custom relationship map, you can include that data and then use all those people when you're searching for connections under a relationship path search. So let me just say, I'll show you for an example of how that works. Let's pretend that Darren Entwistle is on United Way Lower Mainland's fundraising subcommittee this year. So we want to connect Darren to them. There we go, United Way of the Lower Mainland. And it's just 2019. Let's say he's just on the fundraising committee for this year, so we want to include that in the network. Now we can see that Darren has been associated with the United Way Lower Mainland as an organizational connection. Now we leave edit mode and this graph is saved. We have Darren connected to James Valsilli and Darren connected to United Way Lower Mainland. All very good so far. So we've built our first custom relationship map. And keep in mind, you can connect people to people, and you can connect people to companies, and you can connect people to fundraising organizations. When you're connecting people to people, you can define how that connection is. Is this a personal connection? Is this a family connection? Is this a professional connection? Now we're going to get into the really cool part. What we're going to do is we're going to leave our little Darren Entwistle silo under My Prospect Profiles, and we're going to see what we can do now that we've associated Darren with United Way Lower Mainland. What we can do now is jump into relationship paths. And now keep in mind, just because we've left our silo doesn't mean the information is out there for CharityCAN at large. This is still a connection that only exists in your version of CharityCAN. Now what we can do is we put in our relationship path search, and we're a fundraiser at United Way Lower Mainland right now. And we want to find out if our new connection, the new person on our fundraising committee, Darren Entwistle, has connections to some of the big organizations that we're prospecting here. So let's say we're United Way Lower Mainland, and we want to see if we have a connection to Rogers. There we go. We find Rogers Communications, and we do a search. And there we go. Well, it turns out in this case, we already did have a connection to Rogers from Jane Leslie Peverett to Charles Savoy. But you can see we're also realizing our Darren Entwistle connections to Rogers. And this is simply because we've now associated Darren Entwistle with United Way Lower Mainland. So we can see that Darren now is able to connect us to Rogers. Let's try this with a few more organizations just to so I can show you how this works. Maybe we want to connect with Loblaw companies. There we go, Loblaw companies, and let's do a search. Now we can see that our Darren Entwistle connections are connecting us to Loblaws. So in addition to someone like, say, Lindsay Gordon, who is or was on the board of United Way Lower Mainland, we're also able to connect Darren to people at Loblaws. Let's do one more just for fun, just to make sure everyone sees how this works. We can try, say, a CIBC. I guess I should probably do Canadian Imperial Bank of Converse. Oh, and it turns out we do have a direct connection to CIBC, but we're also realizing our Darren Entwistle connections to CIBC. Now, I do want everyone to keep in mind, these are not just limited to one person. You could associate as many people as you would like to your organization under a custom relationship map, and then search all their connections using relationship paths. You could add major donors, major friends of your organization, people who used to work for your organization who don't anymore. They weren't in a director's role, so CharityCAN isn't going to have that information on them, but you know they exist, and you know you can still pick up the phone and talk to that person and get them to make a call for you if you realize an interesting connection that person has. So let's just recap making a custom relationship map and then putting it to use. The first thing we have to do is save a profile. So to save a profile, first we find a profile under the integrated search. So let's say our old friend James Balsillie, who I've been picking on all day. Prospect profiles. I've already saved it. So instead of view save profile, this would be save profile. So we click view save profile. Now this is our own version of the Jim Balsillie profile. We jump down to the relationship map right here. We go over to a custom graph. This is the custom graph that I've already created for Jim Balsillie here that you and we were working on earlier. But let's add a few more things to this custom graph. Just I want to make sure that everyone's comfortable with this. We click custom graph. We click edit. Now we can start connecting organizations. We know that Jim Balsillie is a major donor to the University of Waterloo. Let's connect them to Jim Balsillie in our custom graph. Let's say he's been a donor since 2010. I'm not sure of the exact years, but that'll work for our purposes. And there, we've added a new organization into our custom graph. There it is, the University of Waterloo. Now, we can start connecting some people as well. CharityCAN will suggest to you people at the University of Waterloo that we think might be connected to Jim Balsillie, and you can choose these people as you want. So let's connect just a few of these people to the map and try to fill it out a little bit. There we go. So now we've connected a few different University of Waterloo people to Jim Balsillie. We could also, let's connect a person, and let's just say we know for a fact that any of these suggested people, maybe Taylor Owen. We want to say that Taylor Owen and Jim Balsillie have a family relationship that has been 6 years long. And we add Taylor to that map. So the big takeaways are to build a relationship map, a custom relationship map, save the prospect profile, scroll down to relationship mapping, click on custom graph, click on edit the graph, and then you can start adding people and organizations to your map and defining those relationships. Once you have associated someone with an organization, you can then use all of those new connections when you do a relationship path search and see if you have any new connections to that organization. So fantastic for adding major donors to your organization and fantastic for building out fundraising subcommittees. Those are the real takeaways I think it has from a prospect research perspective. Another great aspect of this, and it shouldn't at all be overlooked, is the ability to build a custom map for your organization. So you can use all of our relationship mapping technology and basically do with it as you want as part of the prospect profile. This will also export as a prospect profile for your organization's purposes. So you're not just staying inside of CharityCAN. Maybe you need to build a map that shows a certain relationship to show someone else in your organization. You can do that right in here, and you can export it just like you could any other relationship map. That comes to the end of everything that I wanted to show you folks today about relationship mapping. And I can't stress enough that I just want everyone to remember that to build a custom map, you first need to save a profile. Then once you've saved that profile, open it, go to the custom relationship map editing, and then you can edit and add people, connections, and define relationships. And then you can use all of those connections whenever you're doing relationship path searches or profile exports. I understand that Matt has been fielding the chat today, so I hope any questions Matt has been able to help you folks out with. Now, hi there, Matt. Did you just join the line?
Hey, sorry, Robert. Yeah, I'm just here. I just wanted to mention that, yeah, there haven't been any questions yet, but I actually have a little bit of time. So if there are any, please type them in the chat box. I'll pass them on to Robert. There might be a slight delay in kind of what you're hearing and what we're talking about. So just go ahead and type it in, and we'll let you know. I also wanted to say there was some feedback that maybe 1 or 2 people were having a bad connection, but as soon as we leave this chat, I think if you use the same URL, you'll be able to rewatch it from the start. I think our uploading has been going smoothly, so it should have recorded everything. So if you did miss something, you should be able to go back and just watch it again to grab the parts that maybe were a little choppy. So yeah, let us know if there's any questions.
Thank you very much for that, Matt. One other point I'd like to make is that we welcome suggestions for future webinar series. So if there's anything that that any of you would like to be discussed on a future webinar, please just leave it in the chat, or if you think of it later, you can always email either Matt, myself, or info@charitycan.ca to suggest a new topic. We plan on holding these with more frequency in the future, so any user feedback on topics would really help us out a lot as well. Okay, well, thank you very much for taking the time out of your day, everybody. And like Matt said earlier, you can use the link to rewatch, or feel free to email info@charitycan.ca, and we can send you a link, especially if you'd like to circulate it amongst some of your colleagues. That would be very much appreciated. We'll also be distributing this webinar in future newsletters, and you'll be able to access them from our site in the future. So thank you very much for taking the time out of your day to watch our webinar on custom relationship mapping. And we hope this new feature that we're extremely excited about serves you well in your research. Have a great day, folks. Bye.